Hey, good afternoon. Just a few comments before I drive off from this parking lot. I just came out from a half decent workout in the gym. Man, the older I get, the more talented I used to be. Well, anyway, I've been even though I don't live in the United States right now, I've been following the news back home, and you've got these shenanigans with the Colorado Supreme Court saying that they're going to take Trump off the ballot by using the third clause of the 14th Amendment. Well, the United States Supreme Court needs to slap this down in a hurry for many reasons. They need to slap it so hard that it reverberates through the chambers of every judge. Um, this is not about whether you like Trump or whether you hate Trump. And I have to say, I did not vote for him either time. But if you don't want Trump to be president, then the people who vote in the Republican primary need to consider voting for somebody else. It's not up to the judges in the Supreme Court. They're acting far outside of their authority. I should say the Supreme Court of Colorado. They're acting outside of their authority. This is wrong in so many levels. On the first level, um, there was no insurrection. You can say what you want about January 6th. It was a very embarrassing moment in this nation's history, but it was not an insurrection. You don't have an insurrection when the only person killed is somebody who's totally unarmed, who's with the so-called insurrectionists. There were no firearms, no weapons, and in an insurrection, the government forces, the police, do not allow people in freely. But nevertheless, Donald Trump nor anybody else was not charged or convicted. The main part, they weren't even charged of violating 18 United States Code Section 2383, which is the insurrection statute. So it's kind of hard to remove somebody saying they were guilty of a certain crime when they were never convicted or even charged with it. That just doesn't hold water. Besides, there's also Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which designates Congress to decide how to punish that through legislation, which they do. It's called United States Code, 18 United States Code, Section 2383. So you've got a big problem with that not adding up. So it's up to Congress to do that by legislation. Some people claim that the third clause of the 14th Amendment does not apply to the president. It talks about electors, members of the House and the Senate, civil officers, and all that. I tend to agree that in that case, it does apply to the president, but not in this case because there was never a charge or conviction of insurrection under the statute, which is outlined in Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. Um, Another thing about this is that it's not up to a court in Colorado to make a ruling on something such at a federal level. So another thing that this is going to do, it's going to play a game of tit for tat, one hand up the bat. And you're going to have other states that are going to try and come up with their own rulings to keep somebody off the ballot. But political weapons, once unsheathed, are never returned to the scabbard. So now you're going to have a situation where you're going to have red states who are going to find a way to keep Joe Biden off the ballot, or that could be used later for some other Democrat. People don't understand these things have long-term consequences. Political games are like that. It reminds me of back when George W. Bush was president, and both Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer were serving as Senate majority leaders when the Democrats controlled the Senate. And they held back, or you could say, what's the word? They were obstructionist, and they held back at least two nominees by George W. Bush, one of them being Janice Rogers Brown to be nominated to be on the court, and the other one was Miguel Estrada, not to be confused with Eric Estrada. But they used their power as majority leader to make sure they didn't get a vote on the Senate floor. Well, guess what? A couple years later, President Obama, a Democrat, is in office, and Mitch McConnell is a Republican. Well, at least some of the times he's a Republican. He was the Senate majority leader, and he prevented the Merrick Garland, whom Obama nominated to be on the Supreme Court, and he wouldn't allow it to come up for a vote. So I can't stand Mitch McConnell, but I'll tell you what, he does deserve credit for keeping Merrick Garland off the court. That guy is, man, he's pretty bad. Not that Trump's justices were phenomenal, but now Merrick Garland is the Attorney General, and he's proven his lack of character on many things. But nevertheless, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just throwing this out there that these things, it seemed good at the time, but they always come back to bite you. And the same goes when you had the Patriot Act under Bush. The Republicans were so happy to give the government all these powers. Well, what happened? They gave the government all these surveillance powers, and we'll chip away a little bit at the First Amendment, a little bit at the Fourth Amendment. And the civil libertarians, a lot of them at the time were Democrats, and they were all like throwing up the flag, like, hey, this is not a good idea. Well, then after Bush is out of office after 2 terms, Obama gets sworn in, and all of a sudden, now the Republicans and the Democrats have switched roles. The Republicans suddenly became all concerned about civil liberties, and the Democrats were all happy to expand the power of government. So you see, these things tend to come back around, and there's a lot of unintended consequences. But if there are people in the Republican Party who don't want Trump to be the nominee, then they need to vote for somebody else in the primary. That should be up to the Republican primary voters. Another thing that can happen with this in Colorado and any other state that tries this nonsense, if they get away with it, the Republican Party can merely decide to have a convention or a caucus in that state. And that way they won't have to worry about him being on the ballot in the primary. Now, by the time the general election comes around, this is supposedly going to be resolved. I believe I read that Trump's lawyers have until January 4th to appeal to the Supreme Court. But nevertheless, people need to really pay attention and really be careful, because they just might get what they wish for. And that applies whether you're a left-wing communist, Marxist, Bernie Sanders, AOC supporter, or whether you're, so far to the right that you're between Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. It doesn't matter. These things, this is not really a partisan issue. It seems like it, but these things can get out of hands. And to quote the former Vice President Al Gore, "You never want to open up a box of Pandoras."